There's a ton of noise out there. So how do you get decision makers to pay attention to your brand? Start a podcast and invite your ideal clients to be guests on your show. Learn more at sweetfishmedia.com.
You're listening to the B2B Growth Show, a podcast dedicated to helping B2B executives achieve explosive growth. Whether you're looking for techniques and strategies or tools and resources, you've come to the right place. I'm James Carberry.
And I'm Jonathan Green.
Let's get into the show. Welcome back to the B2B Growth Show. We are here today with Patrick Campbell. He is the co-founder and CEO of ProfitWell. Patrick, how you doing today, man?
Doing well, man. Doing well. It's awesome to be here, talk about some growth in the good old world of B2B.
Yes, man. I heard you on Seeking Wisdom, I guess it was a couple weeks ago now, and I've heard you on some other podcasts as well. And you are a wealth of knowledge around all things pricing. And we're going to actually talk about a lot of that in this interview. But before we get into that, I'd love for folks to understand just a little bit more context if they're not already familiar with you. So tell us a little bit about ProfitWell and what you and your team are up to up there.
Yeah, totally. The most generic way I can explain it, which seems to be the best, is we help subscription companies grow. And I realize that's basically the title of mostly every page on the internet right now for B2B software. But no, we specifically target subscription companies, and we have a free metrics product. So you plug in your billing system, Stripe, Zora, whatever you're using, and get free access to your MRR, churn, your engagement data, just basically all the data that you need for free, and it's 100% accurate. And then we, which was not an easy feat. I say that very like, oh yeah, it's 100% accurate. But that was like the hardest thing in building the company. And then we have some paid products that help you with problems. So our whole philosophy is if we're going to show you a problem or opportunity, that should be free. And then once we help you with that opportunity or make you more money, that's when you'll pay us. And a lot of our products are set up in a way that you only pay us when you make money, which is obviously a good little value metric to use. But yeah, we actually started with the world of pricing, but we've kind of repositioned to this kind of more broader kind of vision of helping subscription companies overall.
Got it. Could you give us a little bit more context there? What would be an example of a product that somebody would need once they're using your free tool? It identifies a problem. Tell us about one of the products that kind of solves a problem that people realize they have once they're using ProfitWell for free.
Yeah, exactly. So let's say you're, a company that's on Zora or Chargebee or one of these other billing systems. So you come in 2 minutes, you click in, and all of a sudden you get all this, MRR, all your financial data in a nice little, tight analytics package. And then all of a sudden you will see inside the app, hey, here are the things that you're having problems with. And we're benchmarking that. And let's say all of a sudden we find your delinquent churn is really, really high. Delinquent churn is credit card failures. Turns out about 20 to 40% of people who are churning or people leaving your product are actually because of credit cards. And there's I could talk about credit cards for hours, but that's not entertaining. So I'll just stop right there. But let's just say that's the problem. Well, based on that, we have a product that you just plug in called ProfitWell Retain that does all the work for you and basically lowers your churn using our algorithms and this data stack that we're sitting on. And then you only pay us for, the folks that we recover up and above your current recovery rate. And then let's say you're using that and all of a sudden, we point out, hey, your ARPU or your average revenue per user, it's growing, but it's not growing as fast as, your cohort or the upper group of your cohort like companies. Do you want some help with this? And then we can get them on the phone and talk about price intelligently and, basically say, hey, like this is how we can help fix your ARPU or fix your pricing. And don't get me wrong, that sounds much more salesy than it actually is. Better for worse, we actually are not reaching out to as many folks as we probably should be, considering we have so many people on the free product. But it's one of those things where we're playing the long game, and that's why we're giving away the base metrics for free.
I love that. So you mentioned something earlier, Patrick. You made reference to a value metric, and that was something we were talking about a little bit offline. Can you expand on this idea of a value metric and why the folks listening to this show should really consider what it is and implement it in what they're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. I think So a value metric is how you charge or what you charge for. So the simplest example is we've all probably used a CRM at some point or some sort of sales product. The traditional value metric that a sales product will sell you on is per user. Other value metrics for marketing products might be per 100 visits or per 100 contacts. And the value metric that we use for retain is the amount of money that we recover, so actual money. And the purpose of a value metric is you want to make sure that you're pricing along where the customer sees value. So for most B2B products, that is money, right? It's either saving costs or saving time, which is money, or bringing more money to your customer. But most of us don't have a kind of, picture perfect, in with our customers like we do, which is, we're right inside the billing system. So charging based on money is hard, right? So typically what you want to do is you want to take one step back, which is, all right, what's the proxy for money? So if I'm HubSpot or a marketing product, it's things like leads. If I'm a sales product, there's typically, my salespeople are bringing in the money. So it's going to be, per salesperson or per user. And the reason it's so important is that when you look at your actual numbers, a value metric allows you to bake expansion revenue and growth right into your pricing model. So if you're just doing feature differentiation, you're relying on someone going, oh, I like that feature in that next tier, let me upgrade. Or you're relying on them getting frustrated because they can't do something. And then you go, hey, in order to do that thing, you need to pay us more money, which isn't always the best experience. And so if you use a value metric, then you make sure that, if they're using more of the product, AKA they're getting more value out of it, more seats, more visits, more contacts, then they're more than happy to pay most of the time. And it makes the relationship really easy where you're like, hey, you're getting more out of the product, you're getting more value, we're just going to start charging you more, or you can delete these users or delete these contacts. And most people go, yeah, okay, yeah, that makes sense. It's like a much easier relationship. And we just see from a very numbers standpoint that it's, those companies that are using a value metric are growing. I think it's close to 2x the rate as those companies that aren't using a value metric. And it's amazing how few, I think it's less than 40% of B2B companies are using value metrics. And they're relatively easy, especially given all these new billing systems that exist where, you don't need to do any heavy coding to have a value metric. You literally can just do some drop down menus inside of ChargeBee or Zora or whatever you're using.
So it's not necessarily people not knowing what their value metric should be so much as it is people using a value metric at all.
I would say, yeah, I think it's a little bit of both, because some people, like, for example, per user, I know I talked about it a lot, but it's actually pretty much a terrible value metric for most companies. So if you're a sales product, a help desk, or a chat product, per user, per seat is exactly what you want to use, because the value of that product typically does expand for each seat that the company has. But for most other products, like a marketing product, for instance, per seat, I can just have everyone use the same login and get the same value, right? And so a good proxy is that if someone can log in and get the same experience as another person logging in on the same login, you probably shouldn't be using per user. And the answer isn't to, basically, attack their IP address and make sure they can only log in from one IP, because then that's a mechanical solution that, you're probably just not focusing on the right problem. But I would say, to answer your question directly, I think the bigger problem, I would say, is exactly what you said, which is, people just not using them. And I think that there's plenty of people who are getting kind of their value metrics incorrect as well.
Have you seen a value metric that stood out to you, super unique? Obviously it's not gonna apply to every business that's listening to this, but just to get people thinking creatively about, what that value metric could be for them.
Oh, that's a great question. So for B2B and some B2C products, whenever you can get as close to money as possible, or actual money, that's the best thing. So there was this app called Paribus. I don't know if you heard of it. I think they got bought, but I don't know. They were a B2C product where you plugged in your Amazon account, and then they tracked Amazon's price increases and decreases. And basically, when there was a price decrease, they automatically filed for a refund. And then basically it was like found money. So they just took a cut, and it was a pretty big cut. It was like 20%, but you're fine with it because you're sitting there and you're like, oh, this is $10 I didn't have. It's totally fine if you take $2. And it's something where I think Amazon eventually was trying to shut them down. I can't remember. I know they got bought, and it wasn't necessarily for the right reasons, if that makes sense. But I don't know enough, so I probably shouldn't have said any of the last 30 seconds. But some unique value metrics. I think one thing that's kind of cool is that there's this agency called PR 2020. That's Paul Retzer, and he actually came up with his own point system, because what he does is marketing agencies. So he's basically selling, blog posts and all kinds of other stuff to run your inbound marketing, and that was kind of his style. And he had this problem where it's kind of, how do you scale that type of a machine and kind of solve the agency pricing problem? So he actually came up with his own point system, and it worked really well because all of his competitors were doing just kind of on scope or on spec, and it was really confusing, and he was providing predictability. So that's something where you could actually make your own up, but most of the time you want to kind of go and really talk to your customers, and your customers are the ones who are probably going to point you in the best direction of where they actually receive value. And so I'm racking my brain, and I realize both of those aren't maybe very unique, but those are some of the more unique ones that we've seen in the market.
I think even the way you guys have done it at ProfitWell is super interesting to me. Charging, it's by the dollars that they save, right? Is that how your retained product works?
Yeah, exactly. And the point there was to make it as easy as possible. So someone comes to us and says, hey, what is this? And we go, we're going to make you more money. And they go, okay, but what about the ones I'm already recovering? And we say, oh, that's fine. Up to that point is free. So up to their current recovery rate's completely free. And then over it is, when we start charging, it's kind of like that Paribus product that I was describing. It's, hey, if we make you money, we take a cut. If we don't, it's free. And that made our sales cycle really simple. That made everything like picture perfect. And if you think about other industries where you're not as close to the money like we are, let's talk about like a CRM. Imagine going and trying to sell a CRM and saying something like, oh, we charge, per X contacts, per Y this, per Z that. And that's something that, kind of Salesforce tries to do. It gets super confusing, especially if you have, a multi-touch sales process. Whereas, a basic CRM that's just like, hey, it's per seat and you get these features, there's per seat and you get these features, or it's this per seat and you get these features. It makes the sales process much, much cleaner.
I love it. So speaking of a lot of B2B companies kind of making the mistake of trying to overcomplicate their pricing, you're actually doing a new series. It launched today, the day that we're recording this, and it's called Pricing Page Teardown. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're doing with that show and kind of what the concept is?
Yeah, definitely. So we're to take a step back, we're basically redoing our entire approach to content and essentially going, series by series. And that's where, we've studied a lot of folks like Sweetfish and other companies out there to basically figure out, how are these folks doing this, and can we do it on our own, or do we need to hire a bunch of these folks? And I think the answer is they're both right. So we're probably going to be hiring folks like Sweetfish to try and help us produce podcasts and different pieces of content, and also doing a bunch internally. And so this is our second series, Pricing Page Teardown, and what we ended up doing was basically going at a pricing page, collecting a ton of data on that pricing page, and then providing commentary just like we would do with our customers, but in a quicker kind of a little bit more, more of a show manner. And so the episode that we just aired was Netflix. And then the next one that's coming up, that's actually launching, I think it's going to be launched a day or so before this podcast airs, is actually on Salesforce. And that's, you and I were joking a little bit before we started recording, that Salesforce is basically one of the most complicated pricing pages out there. And it's one of those things where only Salesforce can get away with it. Anyone else out there should look at it and run, because it's definitely, you literally, as I kind of joked before, you need a legend, you need like a map legend. And I think they literally have one on their page to figure out what is in what plan, how much each plan is. And it takes almost a half hour just to figure out what's going on their page.
And so you guys you're collecting data, like you're getting like, hey, this is how this page has converted over the last 90 days, or what kind of data are you guys pulling?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we're actually going out to customers or target customers of each of these companies. And we're not talking like a dozen, we're going out to thousands. So for Netflix, we collected 4,500 customer responses. For Salesforce, I can't remember, but it's definitely close to that as well. And we're actually collecting, we have some algorithms that allow us to collect data like willingness to pay and what features they enjoy. It's kind of what we use for our pricing product. And we're basically figuring out, hey, Netflix is actually priced pretty well here, but here's all the mistakes they're making. Or Salesforce is priced okay here, but here's all the mistakes they're making. Just to essentially, help you learn that even these big giant companies still have pricing mistakes. And then there's a few episodes that we filmed that are a little bit more controversial because we found some major mistakes in certain pricing strategies. But we'll let you check those out before I reveal too much.
Well, I saw the Netflix episode today on LinkedIn. Are there other channels? Is this going to be on YouTube? Or where can folks find the content?
Yeah, so the easiest way is we're sending these out each week to an email list. So you can just go, if you find the episode on our Price Intelligently or ProfitWell blogs, just sign up there. But the other, if you don't want to get on the email list, it's either on my LinkedIn at Patrick Campbell or on our YouTube account, ProfitWell YouTube account. So you'll be able to see it in a couple of different ways, and hopefully you won't have to go too far before you see it if you're in the B2B SaaS world.
So we've talked about the concept of a value metric. Loved the examples that you shared there, and really just the importance of getting people to think in terms of, is their pricing aligned with this concept? We talked about not making your pricing too complicated. You guys doing an entire show dedicated to this, which I think is incredible. The last thing I want to talk to you about, Patrick, before I let you go today, is this idea of localization. We were talking about it a little bit offline, but can you expand on this idea before I let you go?
Yeah, if you're not familiar with so this localization or internationalization of your pricing, especially if you're a B2B company, and especially if you've never done anything with your pricing, is probably the easiest and best thing to start with. And the basic concept is that human beings and just our ecosystems are all a little bit different. So someone buying a CRM in Boston or Florida, where James, you are, it's probably something that the willingness to pay is probably going to be similar, right? Whereas the willingness to pay for someone buying that in London or in Eastern Europe is probably going to be very different depending on the saturation of CRMs there, the brand that we're selling, how much word of mouth is in those regions. And so what we typically find is that most people or most companies, you should be changing your prices or adjusting your prices for each major region that you're in. And if even 10% of your customers are from outside the United States, you should be localizing your pricing in those regions. And what localization means is the first step is to just make sure your currency symbols are set up. So if someone's coming to you from the United States or Canada or even the Australian region, just putting in dollars. If someone's coming from the UK, make sure it's pound sterling. And if someone's coming from Europe, just making sure it's the euro. And then one step from that is basically making sure that the relative price in each of those regions is adjusted. And so I can tell you right now, and it's a little bit different depending on the product, but the Nordic region is typically willing to pay about 30% more than the United States. The UK region is typically probably about 20%. Europe as a whole, 20 or 15%, depending on East or Western Europe. And all of these different incremental changes are obviously pretty big to your revenue, especially if 30% or 40% of your base is actually from outside of the United States. So it's definitely something to kind of consider. And it's one of those things where you don't have to necessarily change your pricing dramatically. And so we normally suggest, if you've never done pricing, which most businesses unfortunately haven't done much, the average amount of time most businesses spend on their pricing in the entire history of their business is actually 15 hours. It's scary how little much time. Yeah, it's insane. So, and it's mainly because you never learned how to do it. You're uncomfortable because it is something that's pretty important. And so this is an easy project where it's like, oh, we don't have to change anything drastically. We literally just have to change the prices in different regions and get some technology that allows us to do that. And then we beautifully can, just kind of, get some confidence in changing our pricing as a whole.
Wow. That's such a fascinating stat that most businesses spend no more than 15 hours in the life of their business on pricing. So with the title of the show being B2B growth, I think this is, again, something that we talked about before. I promised I'd let you go after talking about localization, but there's one last piece that I want to jam with you on, because I think this is going to be really, really helpful for listeners. So when most people think about growth, they think about, new user acquisition. And really, it seems like the root of what ProfitWell was built on is this idea that there are tremendous growth opportunities by looking at things like pricing and retention. Can you kind of hammer that point home, kind of why pricing is such a massive growth lever for B2B companies, and then I will actually let you go, I promise.
Oh, no. So I love talking about this stuff. So I could talk for days. Probably, it's not entertaining to your listeners necessarily, but here's the thing. You've probably heard already or inferred from this conversation that we're, love our data points and do a lot of research. And to give you some context, we looked at, I think it was right around 30,000 posts written on growth, and mostly B2B. So 30,000 blog posts that were written about, hey, this is how you grow your business. This is how you grow your business in a B2B environment. And quite literally, between 7 and 8 out of every 10 posts were written about acquisition-based growth, meaning this is how you get more customers, this is how you convert more leads, this is how you get more leads, all those different things. And don't get me wrong, getting more leads is super, super important. It's very, very important to get more leads. But unfortunately, when I look at this data, I see the fact that it's really that we have a misunderstanding of where growth actually comes from. When you start crunching the data and when you start looking at the effectiveness of your major 3 levers, especially in a subscription business, your acquisition, your monetization, and retention, we're finding that 1% improvement in your acquisition is only bringing you about 3% boost in your revenue. And that number is actually decreasing. So it's not going to get to 0, because obviously acquiring more customers is definitely going to make you grow. But product is so easy to switch in and out now these days, just because software has gotten so good. Users are very ungrateful because we've just gotten used to, basically having space age technology in our pockets for the past 5 to 10 years. And essentially what's happening is you need to focus more on the monetization and retention, because those are the things that are going to keep those users and obviously keep those users at the right price. And that same 1% improvement, if we kind of look at it on monetization and retention, it brings us between, depending on, what industry or vertical you're in, between 7 and 10x the same impact that acquisition does. And so the advice is that obviously you need to spend more time on your retention and monetization based on, the 15 hours that I mentioned before. But it also means that you need to really rethink how you're growing and acquiring customers. And that's why we've switched to this kind of multimedia model or podcasting. We've taken, like I already said, a lot of basically advice and things like that from, folks like Sweetfish and other like media companies out there, because we need to get better at acquisition, but realize that we need to get better at acquisition just to survive. Like, we're not going to grow. We just need to be really good at content to survive. And then we need to make sure our retention, our monetization is really, really good in order to actually grow. And so that's kind of how we look at it personally based on the data. And that's really what we kind of evangelize externally, which is, this balanced growth. Like, we don't live in a world where we can just throw a bunch of money at the wall in terms of leads and just magically grow our businesses. Now we have to be more of a scalpel rather than a sledgehammer.
That makes so much sense, Patrick. I really appreciate you sharing this. I mean, the data that you bring to the table to me is mind-boggling. So thank you so much for sharing. If there's somebody listening, they want to stay connected with you, they want to learn more about ProfitWell, what's the best way for them to go about doing this?
Yeah, I'm Patrick at priceintelligently.com or PC at ProfitWell.com, depending on which domain you're on. They all go to the same place. And then I'm also Paticus, Patticus on Twitter. It's a childhood nickname. More than happy to explain that in another podcast episode, but that's where I'm at on Twitter.
Awesome. And make sure you follow Patrick on LinkedIn. Like I said, I saw the pricing page teardown that he posted earlier today, and so you'll want to make sure that you're following the rest of the content that he's putting on LinkedIn as well. Patrick, man, thank you so much for your time today. This has been incredible. So thanks again for being on the show, man.
Yeah, I love it. Thanks for having me.
There are lots of ways to build a community, and we've chosen to build the B2B growth community through this podcast. But because of the way podcasts work, it's really hard to engage with our listeners. And without engagement, it's tough to build a great community. So here's what we've decided to do. We're organizing small dinners across the country with our listeners and guests. No sales pitches, no agenda, just great conversations with like-minded people. We'll talk business, we'll talk family, we'll talk goals and dreams. We'll build friendships. So if you'd like to be a part of a B2B growth dinner in a city near you, go to b2bgrowthdinners.com. That's b2bgrowthdinners.com. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.